Bit out of breath, just had to run downstairs to get the delivery man before he left. Good morning everyone, welcome back to the Morning Bible. I think this is the first time I started one of these being slightly out of breath. We are in Luke chapter 22. Jesus is still talking at the dinner table, which sounded like I was complaining. I'm not. He says very, very interesting and key stuff for all of Scripture. But today's passage is one that I don't really know quite what to make of it. We've had a couple of these, sorry, I'm still trying to catch my breath. We've had a couple of these come through in Luke where a passage will come up. It'll be really interesting, but I won't know quite what to make of it. I don't know quite what the message is from it, or if we're supposed to understand it, and if so, how. And for today's passage, my Bible offers kind of two possible explanations for it, but I'm not really all that convinced by either one. So let's just have a read and we'll see what we make of it. So Jesus is still sitting around the dinner table with all of his disciples. We're going from verse 35. This is after Jesus tells Peter that he's going to betray him. So this kind of the atmosphere in the room is that everyone's a bit like tense, like, oh, Peter's going to betray Jesus. So let's go. Verse 35, it says, "And he said to them, 'When I sent you out with no money bag or knapsack or sandals, did you lack anything?' They said, 'Nothing.' He said to them, 'But now let the one who has a money bag take it, and likewise a knapsack. Let the one who has no sword sell his cloak and buy one. For I tell you that this scripture must be fulfilled in me.' And he was numbered with the transgressors. For what is written about me has its fulfillment. And they said, 'Look, Lord, here are 2 swords.' And he said to them, 'It is enough.'" So, yeah. That's kind of it. It's an interesting little passage, but I figured I'd sort of trace a couple of the references in it back to other passages and to kind of see what those tell us. So first up, when Jesus says, "And he said to them, 'When I sent you out with no money bag or knapsack or sandals, did you lack anything?' They said, 'Nothing.'" So this is referring back to a story we've already heard in Luke. I can't remember the exact, I should have looked this one up. I think it was around chapter 10, but I don't know. Essentially, Jesus sends out his 12 disciples and he tells them to go without anything with them. Yeah, I'm not going to be able to find it super quick, so we won't go back to read it. But it happens a couple of times. Jesus collects his group of disciples with him. He says, "Take nothing with you for the road. You can take the sandals that are on your feet, the clothes that are on your back, and but don't take a spare pair of sandals, don't take a spare pair of clothes, don't take money with you, don't take any of these things with you. Go into towns, and if someone provides you a house, if someone offers to feed you and clothe you, then go into that house and accept what that person's taking you in. But if no one accepts you in a town, no one wants to hear about Jesus, no one wants you to come and stay in their houses, then wipe the dust off your sandals, wipe the dust off your feet, and go on to the next town. Go to the next place, and you wiping the dust off your feet will be sort of a testament against those people that God will see." So that's essentially what Jesus is referencing here. But this time he changes it. He says, "When I sent you with no money or knapsack or sandals, did you lack anything?" The disciples said, "Nothing." They were provided for when they did this. But Jesus changes this. He says to them, "But now let the one who has a money bag take it, and likewise a knapsack. And let the one who has no swords sell his cloak and buy one." So we get a few things here, right? We get money bag first off. Jesus specifically calls out 3 items. He isn't making a whole big list that kind of goes on to show like take nothing with you or you can now take anything with you. Jesus doesn't do that. He calls out 3 specific items that they can now take with them. He says, "Let the one who has a money bag take it." So if you have a money bag, you can take it. So this is still saying, if you don't have a money bag, you can still go and do mission, right? Jesus' point here is you can still go out without this money bag. But if you have a money bag, take it with you. Take those funds with you now. And he says, and likewise a knapsack. So a knapsack, you sort of take your essentials with you. You can kind of take a small amount of goods with you. To kind of, things that you need. He's saying you can take those things now. And he says, "And let the one who has no sword sell his cloak and buy one." So Jesus is saying here, look, if you've got a cloak on your back right now, a sword is more important than carrying a cloak. which is, that seems like a very un-Jesus-like message, right? Because we have this perception that Jesus is very peaceful, very, kind of turn the other cheek. He tells people off using weapons for fighting, and yet he's telling these people to take swords. And so, what's the purpose of this passage? Where is Jesus sending them, I think, is the key question we should be asking, right? So, if this is like before, for example, when Jesus sent out the disciples, that is a model that we have used since, and the church has used since, and I think is a good model for how you should do mission, where you take nothing with you, you go where you are provided for, and you invest in those relationships where the people have an open heart to you, and you can build something organic there. And you build community and you teach people, but you don't rely on having loads of funding, loads of this, that or the other. You just go and trust God to provide. That was the sort of model that was put in place earlier in Luke, and I think that's a good model for mission. But the model here, Jesus doesn't specify whether this is a model for mission, right? It seems to an extent like it is, because Jesus reminds them, when I sent you with no money bag or knapsack or sandals, did you lack anything? Jesus is calling back to a time where he sent them on mission. But we don't know if he's sending them on mission here, because Jesus doesn't say what this is for. If you read in the context of the book of Luke, this is Jesus preparing them to go to the Mount of Olives. And to go to sort of where Jesus is going to face trial and face death. So this isn't gearing up his disciples to go out into the world and spread the gospel. This is Jesus gearing up his disciples for this period of difficulty, of hardship. But Jesus doesn't specifically say which one of these things it is, whether it's him preparing them for mission, which is kind of implied through him saying the first bit, referencing the previous mission, or whether it's him preparing them for him going to the cross. He doesn't say which it is. So to say either with any certainty is to kind of be entering into your own kind of speculation and interpretation, which isn't necessarily a bad thing with Scripture, but rely on Scripture where you can, rely on where it's certain, where it's clear, whenever you can, and don't put too much stock in your own sort of reading of it and understanding of it, because that's where things can start to slip. But let's see what Jesus says next, because that isn't where the passage ends. He says, "For I tell you that this scripture must be fulfilled in me, and he was numbered with the transgressors." So, this is going to take us back to Isaiah again. We've been to Isaiah a couple of times now, and this is going to take us to Isaiah 53. We're only going to read a verse of it, so don't worry about flipping back to it. If it's going to take too long, I'd say focus on paying attention to this bit. This is verse 12 from chapter 53 of Isaiah. It says, "Therefore I will divide him a portion with the many, and he shall divide the spoil with the strong, because he poured out his soul to death, and was numbered with the transgressors. Yet he bore the sin of many, and makes intercession for the transgressors." So there's some big words in there, and you don't necessarily need to understand all of what it's talking about here. But this is, in the book of Isaiah, Isaiah was prophesying what is going to come. Right, and he prophesies very specifically into who Jesus is and what Jesus does while he's on the earth. And this part in particular says he was numbered with the transgressors. Right, so transgressor, if you transgress something, it means you sort of go past a boundary, you transgress, you go into a place you're not supposed to be. So essentially you're a sinner, you do something wrong. You sort of step outside the boundaries of where you're allowed to be into somewhere where you're not allowed to be. You do something that you're not allowed to do. That's a transgressor. So you could transgress sort of one of the 10 commandments. You're stepping beyond that commandment. That's kind of what it means. So the transgressors, Jesus is numbered with the transgressors. So that means when sort of they take account of who are the bad people, Jesus is put right there among them. Even though we haven't seen Jesus do anything wrong, we have no evidence of Jesus ever doing anything wrong, and yet he is put amongst these people who do wrong. Yet he bore the sin of many and makes intercession for the transgressors. So the sin is the things people do wrong. Jesus bore the sin of many, right? He's taken on the things that we do wrong unto himself. He is sort of standing there among the transgressors in our place so that we don't have to stand there. And he makes intercession for the transgressors. So intercession, it's kind of interceding, if you know what that means. It's where you basically, on behalf of someone else, you are trying to ask for kind of forgiveness or for help, right? And so for example, if this was in school and you see one of your mates has been treated unfairly by a teacher, you go to the teacher and you say, hey, could you treat them a bit better because blah, 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 and this and that. That's kind of, you'd be kind of interceding on your friend's behalf in that situation. Now, God isn't like the teacher in that story because God doesn't punish us unfairly, but we have Jesus interceding on our behalf, right? We have the Son of God, God walking among humans, a perfect sinless man is standing up there and he's interceding for the transgressors, for people who we would be numbered with, and for all the people who are surrounding him. So there's quite a lot there. Essentially, Jesus is saying, if we skip back to Luke now, where Jesus is giving these instructions, he is saying the scripture must be fulfilled in him. So he is saying what Isaiah has prophesied, what Isaiah said back then about him being numbered with the transgressors, that has to happen. Jesus knows that he is going to be tried as a criminal. He's going to be put among the people who have done wrong in this society. He is going to be numbered with them. Jesus knows this is coming, and so that potentially is why Jesus is telling his disciples to sell their cloaks and buy swords and make sure they're protected, because they could be caught up in this as well. There's a possibility that they could, if they're not defending themselves, if they're not keeping themselves safe, that they could be taken in with Jesus and face similar problems. Yes, for what is written about me has its fulfillment. And the disciples said, look, Lord, here are 2 swords. And he said to them, it is enough. So my Bible sort of gives a couple interpretations for when Jesus says it is enough. One of them is that it genuinely is enough. 2 swords will protect the 12 of them. That's what I tend to go with. I think taking Jesus at face value on what he says is the best way to understand him, what he's saying most of the time. But my Bible also offers the interpretation that Jesus is kind of exasperated with them. He's saying like, oh, enough, you guys aren't understanding. 2 swords isn't what I'm talking about. I'm talking about metaphorical swords. But we're not going to go into the whole question of is this passage all very metaphorical, because I think that's a whole interpretation that is more based on your own thinking than it is on what's actually written here. So we're not going to go there. We're going to take what Jesus is saying as literal, and he is saying to these people that they should buy swords and protect themselves. And so that's kind of where we're going to end it today. Tomorrow you'll kind of see why, I guess the day after you'll kind of see why they're taking swords with them. It starts to get a little bit tense. It's one of those passages where you kind of specifically want to know what Jesus is talking about. But sometimes there are things that you just don't quite understand in the Bible, and that's okay. And I think the important thing is taking it, in those situations, just take it at face value, and just sort of accept what is there, and don't try to sort of justify it or change it. And so I think Jesus telling his disciples to sell their cloaks and buy swords is Jesus telling his group of disciples that they need to sell their cloaks and buy swords because they're going to be in danger soon. I don't necessarily know if that's a wider message for the church or in specific situations like this or anything like that. I'm not going to enter into that, but for that instance, Jesus is definitely telling his disciples that they should buy some swords, and so we're going to see why in a couple of days. But until then, I hope you have a good day and a good day after that, and I will see you all tomorrow. Bye.